I'm going to pass these around.
We can
because
pass them around, actually.
I can't cover it.
That's right. Anne made up a handy dandy guide for
Now,
everybody.
This is a work in
So
progress. I improved a little bit, I'm sure, on what I did 2 years ago. So we'll try to improve on it even more if we can. I did some of the research that I used to produce this. There's a book put out by the Colorado Archeological Society. Kind of gives the cultural history up to proto-historic times. And I used that as a reference for some of your information there. And then Roxborough State Park has a little pamphlet called Hogbacks in History, which you might be interested in. Now, I think this one I paid, yeah, it's up to $2. We used to sell these for $1, but it'll cost you $2 if you decide you want one. I got some information from them. And then the Tates did a lot of the original archaeological information on this area, the whole Chatfield Basin. Did a lot of studies down in Roxborough, studied here to look for Native American evidence, that sort of thing. And so there's some papers that they have written. They did a number of presentations when they were still working for the state down at Roxborough, so I had notes and things from a lot of those and some papers, so I used some of that information. And then Paula Erisman worked before they opened the state park here, before Roxborough opened. She did a lot of oral history. You know, when I was in high school and they talked about history, I thought, who likes history? It's just a bunch of numbers. It is so boring. But you know, if you really get into it, what Paula did is she went around and talked to people. You get that oral history. And that's when history gets interesting and fun. Because there's still a lot of old folks around that lived quite a while back and have given oral history through the years. So that's some of the people that I used for this information. And I'll go through here pretty rapidly. They kind of gave you an introduction to who I am. We moved here in '75 with our young family. And I told my husband I wasn't moving anymore. He worked with Chevron and we had moved quite a bit, but I guess he believed me, so we did not get transferred anymore. Thank goodness. This is a wonderful place to live. And so I worked a lot with handicapped swimmers, with South Suburban for about 10 years, and South Suburban destroyed that program, and so I thought, I read about Roxborough, and so I went down and got involved with the Roxborough Volunteer Naturalist, and I got involved with the whole Chatfield Basin because it's such a beautiful, interesting place. It's so important to preserve this because it has a lot of different habitats, a lot of different open spaces, and I volunteer Roxborough and Botanic Gardens and South Lap Park and Good State Park and
Anne has no free time.
anything I can do to help stop bad things happening to the environment in Chatfield Basin. So that's kind of that. Now, if you look at this, you'll notice that because I'm very close to my 75th birthday, I do not do PowerPoints. They're beautiful, but I have no clue. I can barely make my computer behave. So you've got a little handout, and that's the best I could do with PowerPoint. I don't know how to do bullets, so you'll notice there's no bullets on there. Okay, here's a timeline. We're kind of going to go down through here as quickly as we can, and I'll cover some extra stuff that I have that we'll do as we go along. So if you look at the little handout, everybody get one of those. It goes through their timeline. Now, some people do BP, that means before the present, but the Archaeological Society still uses BC, which is before Christ, and AD, which is Anno Domini, which means after the year of our Lord. And so that's the stages that were here. And all of these are represented in Colorado, the Paleo-Indian, Archaic, Late Prehistoric, Proto-Historic. If you want to stick a little extra one in there called the Historic, that's what we know probably from the mid-1800s. So we think there's some possible pre-Clovis migrations in this area, probably before 9,500 BC. Ceramics were introduced somewhere around 200 years after our Lord. If you believe in God, if you don't, just use that as a date. So I'm not pushing anything on you. Introduction of the bow and arrow was around 100, 250 AD. Horses were adopted in the late 1600s. That made a huge change in how the Native Americans operated in this area. In 1926, near Folsom, New Mexico, a cowboy found some spear points among some long extinct bison bones from the Paleo-Indian period. And so that kind of gave us an idea that there were people here doing hunting and that sort of thing that long ago. When you find them associated with the bones, like maybe that animal died from that projectile point. Another find was made with mammoth bones. Chile and Pennsylvania found some finds. So there's a lot of evidence that there were things going on across the U.S. Now, we really haven't found a whole lot of stuff from the actual Clovis people in Colorado, but there is some evidence that has been found near Goshen, Folsom, and in the Bonnell periods.
Where are those located, Ian?
Excuse me?
Goshen and Folsom, where are those towns at?
Those are periods.
Oh,
that
periods.
They gave that are within the Clovis period.
Okay.
So those are like sub-periods. These people hunted on the plains, foraged in the foothills, collecting berries, nuts, and plants, ventured high into the Rockies. For a long time they didn't really realize that they went up into the Rockies, but then they found those little rock things that they would hide behind, and then they'd herd the animals by and spear them. I found a real beautiful piece up there by Summit Lake. It appeared to be maybe a scraper of some sort, made out of something that doesn't exist up there. But the snow had really melted back that summer, so they were around. They had to watch out for saber-toothed tigers, cave bears, dire wolves. While they hunted the bison, these are prehistoric bison, elk, camels, mammoths, deer, and bighorn sheep. During the Archaic age, the climate warmed. Some groups developed some agriculture, becoming semi-nomadic, so they didn't have to just wander all the time. They often wintered in natural rock shelters or cottonwood groves and used small portable teepees. So there's a rock shelter down by Roxborough on the road that's behind the park that you cross over when you go to Carpenter Peak. And there's a rock shelter there that was used. It's just a kind of a rock is kind of moved off of the main rock, and there's kind of a split there. Of course, the sun shines on that in the fall and the winter, and it's a nice place to hang out. Those Native Americans used a lot of acorns. The Campbell's oak was prized as a high protein source because it was easy to extract the acid from it by washing it. You don't just eat an acorn. Squirrels can do that, but we don't. And so you kind of have to wash the acid out of it. There was, they dried meats and fruits to save for winter consumption. They left rock art for archaeologists to puzzle over. Because you can look at those pictures and you make your own decision as to what that stands for. You have no idea. what that really stood for. If you, let's say somebody saw an American flag 5,000 years from now. What is that? Somebody was looking at the sky? Now the stars don't demonstrate the sky, do they? What are the stars for? The states, right? So they would interpret it totally wrong. So we really don't know exactly what all that art means, but it's very interesting. It's something that they did leave. They didn't leave anything written for us. They left, they used baskets and hides because they hadn't started ceramic yet during the archaic age. And so they had to use these baskets or tightly woven to hold water. And they used an atlatl. I don't know how many of you know what an atlatl was. It was invented many different times by many different civilizations. It was really an extension of your arm. You know, they used to throw a spear, but then if you physically, if you could extend this arm and make it even longer and had the spear out at the end, then you could throw it even harder and further. And that's what an atlatl does. And I'll pass this around and you get it back.
The word is a Nahuatl word from the Aztecs.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Aztecs spoke a language called Nahuatl.
That's interesting.
And Atlatl was
Came from that, yes. And so these are pictures of some different types of atlatls, and the first one is very rudimentary, just a stick with a hole in the end of it to kind of extend and make your spear hook way out here. And then you do that with it, and then it has several different ones. So these folks that at the Tates had done all this archaeological stuff, they just started a little business called Tate Enterprises, and they were selling atlatls. So this is their little sales thing. It's kind of fun to pass around. You can see pictures of different atlatls. Okay. Bow and arrow and the ceramics came in. Agriculture, they started doing some agriculture. So then they would always settle near where there was water. That's pretty obvious, isn't it? If you need, there's not enough water here to grow things. So you're going to have to irrigate or carry water, add some water. So they usually settle near water. After about 600, beans and squash were added to their diets. They also, recently they discovered trees that had huge pieces cut off of bark. And they used bark to eat. We know now starving people do that. But they used it for medicine and for food. And so there's ponderosas that have this scar on them. They puzzled over, what was that? Well, they were actually taking off big pieces of the bark to use, especially in the trade. Information on Native American tribes such as Utes, Navajos, Apaches, and Comanches, Arapahoes, and Cheyennes is somewhat sketchy. The Utes were living along the front range when early settlers from the east arrived to trap beaver and game for pelts and to look for gold. By the late 1800s, the remaining indigenous peoples of Colorado were living on trust land set aside for their use by the U.S. government. And you all know that how important it is if you find something like an arrowhead or an old fire pit or something of that sort, you're not supposed to disturb it, report it to somebody, and they can properly study it. Now what a lot of archaeologists do now is they just don't open it up, because we've done a lot of studies along here, and as the future comes along, we'll have better ways of studying things. And so you can wait and dig it up later when you know more about what you're doing and you have maybe some more scientific methods to study things. At Roxborough, we covered over some special sites that we needed to use for something else. So they're protected by a layer soil or gravel or something of that sort, if it was along a trail or whatever. At this site, there was a lithic scatter site right here where the parking lot is. Lithic scatter is where they sat and made stone tools, arrowheads. And somebody forgot about that when they made the pavilion here, and they just.
Do you know how old that was, Anne? How old were the lithics? Were they Clovis or?
It's probably, it would have been from the whole nomadic time. It's hard to date some of those things that are just on the surface.
Right.
If you don't, work down, because they could have just eroded from some other layer.
Mm-hmm.
But there was particularly a site right out here. There's over 40 sites, and actually now since they've added property in Roxburgh, something like 50 or so almost up to the 70s, because they've done some more studies of more sites where they found lithic scatter, and there's 2 sites at Roxborough where they found fire rings that were eroding out, so you could just barely see the fire ring. They would, since they didn't have pots and pans, they would make a thing of a lot of rocks, build a fire in there and get it really hot, get all the rocks hot. Then they put whatever they wanted to cook in there, and then they put dirt on top of it, and then it would cook. So there's some fire rings down there. We don't talk about where those are because we don't probably mess with them.
So there wasn't an age. We don't know if that lithic scatter was from the Utes or previous.
No, I don't think they have age. Tate said that a lot of that surface, they don't really know the actual age of it, so it's hard to do that. We have that the Apaches were dominant in the vicinity until the early 1700s. They were driven south, so this is kind of interesting. If you try to explain all the different tribes and how all this happened. There were these different tribes, and they kept moving each other this way or that way, but they were driven by the aggressive expansion of the Comanches and their Ute allies, and they in turn were displaced by the Cheyennes and Arapahoes, who were the last tribes on Colorado's high plains, but the Utes were right along the front range here. And so there's some interesting stories about the early Utes. Some of that a little bit later here. How are we doing on our time? Got to go faster. This is some of the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. Here's some of the first recorded Euro-Americans of European descent to visit the area were members of the Long Expedition in 1820. On July 6th of that year, members of Major Stephen Long's party of scientific exploration camped at the entrance to the Platte Canyon. That's right here.
Right up the, literally.
Yeah, right here.
About 50 steps that way.
Water Dr. Edwin James of the Long Party wrote, so you can close your eyes and think about what he said. We arrived at the boundary of that vast plain across which we had journeyed for a distance of near on 1,000 miles. So we've been out there looking at nothing. The woodless plain is terminated by a range of naked and almost perpendicular rocks, visible at a distance of several miles and resembling a vast wall parallel to the base of the mountain, with interesting views of singular color and formation. The whole scenery truly picturesque and romantic. That's neat, I worry. Are they going to be able to take a disc and find out what we wrote? Will they have a machine that can read that? We have these things that these people wrote, and it's exciting. And I'm wondering what's going to happen to our civilization, and whether some of these things will be lost, that were saved by these people. They saw a big bear that had blonde hair. It was huge. So it probably was a grizzly bear while they were camped there. Chief Colorado, there's a cave Springs. Visited a family along Plum Creek, and they were talking with Mary Lowell's mother. This is one of Paula Erisman's oral histories. After he wanted to trade ponies, beads, masks for Bert, their baby. Of course, they weren't. And the other child, was one of the other children that was telling the story. She said, I was really worried that my mom was going to trade my baby brother for a pony. Really worried. There's an oral history from Ramona Helton recounting a story told by her grandparents of youth stealing a 9-year-old daughter from the Slocums. The Slocums had a cabin right down here, right across the road, just above where all the things are there, just right along where the road is. And they moved that cabin over to Chatfield State Park, so you can visit that cabin. It's the oldest cabin in Colorado.
They have every spring in May, they have, I think it's May or June, they have Slocum Cabin Days, so you can actually go there. It's a whole festival over a weekend, and they teach you a little bit about the history. And we've been inside the cabin, and it's amazingly still standing all these years later.
So that's really neat to have the Slocum. But they told a story that their 9-year-old daughter was taken, and was never returned. So that's scary. That happened with the Native Americans and interactions between the two as we took their land away from them, as we took over this area. The Cheyennes and Arapaho were moved to reservations in 1872, but the Utes were kind of considered friendly, and they were not moved until 1880. And there's another story of a whole bunch of Indians showing up outside this cabin that they used to make biscuits, and whenever she would make biscuits, the Indians would show up, and so she was worried that they were going to really attack them, so they just threw the biscuits out the window, and the Indians got the biscuits, So, but the Indians it was hard for them to find food because a lot of things have been shot. Their populations were not quite as large as the populations that moved in. This area was acquired by a number of different homesteads, but as far as I could figure out, this particular area was probably acquired as a homestead. It's very interesting. I'll pass this around. It says, in pursuance of the Act of Congress approved March 3rd, 1855, entitled an act in addition to certain acts granting bounty land to certain officers and soldiers. So this was land that would be awarded to officers and soldiers who have been in the military service of the United States. This was mainly during the Civil War. There has been deposited in the General Land Office warrant number, it gives a number, for 160 acres in favor of Ramona Moreno, widow of Raphael Moreno. So that's the original person here. So she acquired this homestead because she was a widow of a Civil War veteran. Now this is the other interesting part. I may have to correct this just a little bit because I mentioned Latino. They had a Latino name, but probably Navajo. The way this reads, it says, the widow of Raphael Moreno, private, of Captain Gonzalez Company, New Mexico Volunteers of the Navajo Indian War. So these were New Mexico volunteers. The Navajos were involved in all of this, so it's interesting as to whether it was Latino or
Not
exactly. But she was a widow, and she got this property. But this changes hands a lot through the years. So I'm going to pass that around to you. This is a property deed. The property. The south part of Pacific Railroad was built from Denver up along the Platte through Waterton Canyon, through Fairplay to Leadville. And it transported lumber and hay goods for the mining industry. The tracks were taken up in 41 for scrap metal. Then I mentioned that this water, Denver Water, was called the Denver Union Water Company originally, but it was the first water treatment plant west of the Mississippi. And they just let the water come into those big settlement ponds, took the silt out, put it in great big wooden conduits, and it went by gravity down to Denver. It didn't have to have chlorine. We didn't have GRD in those days. I remember backpacking in the Sierras in the 60s, we didn't have GRD. We just drank out of the creeks. So anyway, they started chlorinating in later years, but originally they just, some of those wooden conduits are still there. So it's pretty fascinating what this was here. This is really a historical place for water, Denver water. If you go about 2 miles up the canyon, you have the Highline Diversion. So sometimes you need to hike up there. You'll see the hole in the ridge, and that's where the Highline starts. Then if you go up up to 3 miles, you have the Marston Diversion. And that's the water that went to Marston to Beaumar. And it gets treated over there. And that's been there quite a while. But they were worried that that lake would freeze all the way to the bottom. So that was their excuse. One of the reasons they wanted to have two forks. But they did get Strontia Dam built in the late 70s. So Strontia Dam is up there about 6 miles. And it is, they thought it would last at least 50 years before they had to dredge it. But then after the Hayman fire, it's half full of silt already. This is a problem with dams. They do get old and they do fill up. And we have to dredge them. And they tried to dredge it, and it wasn't successful. They got about half dredged. It was closed for what, 2 years?
Yeah, it just reopened
Almost
this
2
spring.
years.
It reopened this April.
So some of the things that have been going on around here. A number of different families have owned this land here where the nature center is. One of the last families, when we started to open this up and work on it, this older fellow came and he used to pick up trash here every Sunday. And he says, "Don't take away my fireplace. Please don't take away the fireplace." Because I watched my dad build that. I guess you saw the picture where they were building the fireplace. And so we still have the fireplace. We don't use it because
It's a fire hazard.
the pack rats have lived in there so long that if you start a fire in there, the heatilators emote strange odors. But this building we didn't plan to heat because it's concrete and stone. We thought we were going to have a nature center. These would be used in the summertime. So that's why we have a pellet stove. We had to take out all the forced air heating because the pack rats have been living in that for 13 years. So everything got ripped out of these buildings when we restored them.
And these were owned by Chatfield before our.
What's that?
These buildings were owned by Chatfield and were used as storage before we.
Okay.
Okay.
What happened was, after all these, the farmers had it, and then John Martin decided to start a company and do contracts with the federal government. And so this was their first offices. And they used the garage over there, they had monkeys over there. And they were going to send those monkeys off into space. So it's a very interesting history of some of the things that had happened in these buildings. And then when they had the flood of '65 and 13 people died, they finally decided, well, we're going to have a reservoir. This is a flood control reservoir. And so the Corps of Engineers decided they have to condemn the land. So they condemned this land, anything where the water would come, if the water went all the way up to the spillway. So right here, it's about 10 feet from here, where we are. Over there by the river, the water would come up there. But they condemned everything, and it's condemned on the other side of Wadsworth, condemned over there by Botanic Gardens, and over there by C470, on the other side of C470. And so they would they have 3 bids, and they take the middle bid, and that's what they pay. If you don't like it, you can sue them, and maybe they'll pay you more. And so they took over this land. And so Martin bought that land over there. And so the Corps of Engineers owned this. And in the 40s, the Corps had all these beautiful reservoirs that nobody could play on. So the government passed a law that they could lease these reservoirs out to local entities for recreation or camping or whatever. So they leased this out to state parks. This part is leased out to state parks. And it's like, for state parks, they pay nothing for the lease. They just have to maintain the buildings. Then, and the Botanic Gardens is a separate lease because the parks didn't want that over there because it's too hard to maintain. So they were going to have a tree farm over there with all these wonderful different types of trees. That mission has changed. But it still has the mission of the historic farmstead. It's in Hildebrands. Homestead over there. The Hildebrands gave very little oral history because the court told them they had to move in the spring, and there was a blizzard at Thanksgiving. And the day before Thanksgiving, the court told them to leave. And so there's very little oral history from that part of the thing. They were mad at the court over that. But we worked hard to get the Hildebrand Ranch open space over there. Got their name on it. Convinced the Hildebrand family that that's better than houses and it should be open space because they didn't want to work with any government. But we called it for that. So that's Jefferson County open space over there. So that's kind of the history there. And then they built this pavilion, Lockheed with TCE, that's cleaning fluid on the Rockies. And then they poured it on the ground because it just dried up. It's just gone. Well, then all of a sudden, I think it's been about 15 years ago, they discovered they had gone through the groundwater and was getting into one of their wells over there, across, just over here by the ponds. They took it down. The well is down now. I think that's one of their, erase that memory. So they put in wells and they take out the groundwater, treat it, because TCE, all you have to do is add air to it. And it goes away. There's some byproducts, but they're not as harmful as TCE. And they kind of had a black eye over that, so they decided to do the pavilion. And they were furnishing wetlands over here. To make up for some wetlands that they didn't furnish, CDOT did not furnish all the wetlands they were supposed to furnish at the Botanic Gardens property when they built C470. So they were just going to run their treated water through these wetlands, and that would make them nicer before they went into the plat. And then something happened a couple of years ago. After all the work we did, we had some volunteers for Colorado Days and planted a lot of things over there in the wetlands. They shut them down and ran a pipe straight into the river. And we don't know, there were stories that the health department said they had to do that, and there's other stories that said that they would have to pay for the evaporation of that water, and they didn't want to do that. So we don't know for sure what the reason is, but those wetlands don't exist right now. They may come back with the Chatfield reallocation as one of the carrots to make that more fun. Where they'll get the water for them, I do not know. They do not have any water rights, but they say they're going to make those wetlands happen. So that's kind of the story between that. So then here they had this pavilion. They called it a pavilion, but they ran out of money, so they never could make the pavilion part. You know, pavilion is a thing, right? And there's a sign that says a pavilion, and there's no pavilion. So I'm in a meeting for the Chatfield Basin Conservation Network, where we were working on all the wildlife corridors around here, 5 minutes around here, and we're trying to save the corridors. They're going to work on Santa Fe over there. We want to keep all animals from getting killed that are crossing Santa Fe, that sort of thing, and working on all that. So there's about 60-some organizations in the Chatfield Basin Conservation Network, government, non-governmental, parks. We all work together to decide where the important things are in this basin, and try to save them. Yes?
What are the geographic boundaries of the Chatfield Basin?
You know, that's a good question, because you can make it tight, or you can open it up. It could go, I would say it probably goes, I think of it kind of up to South Platte, Roxburgh, maybe up to Sedalia. You could go up to Castle Rock with it, and over that way, over into Highlands Ranch. And that way I'd go down to South Platte Park. That's my feeling of kind of where the basin is.
'Cause I see the term Chatfield Basin,
Yeah.
I've never seen it defined.
Yeah, and it isn't, it's not a real true definition. And the name Chatfield itself is a family that bought some land along the north side of the lake. It was a Colonel Chatfield. And he had a lot to do with building that railroad, the Denver South Park Pacific Railroad, that went up Waterton and went over to Leadville. And he didn't ever really live there. But somehow his name got put on everything around him. And it's confusing, because people go over there looking for this, and they go here looking for botanic gardens, and somehow we probably should have named everything a little bit differently, so we could find it. Yeah, that's, and then I was at this meeting, and Bob Stearns, that had helped plan the pavilion, he said, well, we've got these two buildings, and the state park's gonna have to tear them down, and there's some asbestos, and, you know, I don't know for sure. Did you know any nonprofits that might be interested? And so I'm thinking, well, I think I do. And, you know, because I'm thinking, gosh, Audubon, we've always had our offices in these strip malls. We just didn't,
We were located in downtown
$1,100 a
Denver,
month
right?
to rent this little thing in a strip mall. And then about every 5 years it moves. And you have to learn how to get there again. And, you know, you can't have a meeting of more than 10 people. And our meetings are in churches. And so I kind of brought it up to the board, and you know how it is with changes. Some people say, oh no, that's too far from everything. And so I did a study, and it's 45 minutes from every one of our zip codes. There's no zip code that this is further of our members than 45 minutes. You could tell people, go to the end of Wadsworth. How hard is it to find? We've got the Waterton Canyon. We've got the whole park. I spent 13 months with Kent, the park manager. We wrote the original leases for this building and for the offices. We paid $25 a year. It's a lot cheaper than a mall. And we could put that money into hiring a car. We don't spend it. So this is what you're part of. It's just really exciting. They mined bricks clay for bricks here. I brought, somewhere, yeah, here's the Silicated Brick Company. If you go down to Roxborough, you see that funny looking thing out behind the firehouse. That's where they bake the bricks. These are not fired. This is a secret formula. When the guy died in 1914, the secret died with him. And so the Silicated Brick Company went bankrupt. But the spur of the railroad used to go down there and pick that up. The Helmers shipped clay, silicone, this special stuff to New Jersey, all over the country. So you see these mines along the Hogback, that's for bricks. You know, Denver had the big fire, and we had to, they said all houses had to be made out of bricks. So that's one of the reasons these people did well while they were functioning. See the S on there? If you see a brick that has an S, that's a Silicated Brick Company. And it's a light colored brick. Some of them have a bigger S. It looks a little bit differently. So that's that one.
We have another one too with a big S hand. Kristen's got that one.
Yeah, this is the one with the big S. I was wondering where that one is. See the big S on there.
And how long were our offices in Denver? The ASGD, how long was the office in Denver?
In Denver? Well, we started in '83. I think we started paying people along in there. So we were down on Pearl Street. We've been
Okay.
over Southeast. We've been over in Greenwood Village.
Are we in Aurora too one time?
Yeah, that was Aurora. It was over by Parker Road and Hamden or Havana. Parker Company there, yeah.
Well,
Just, you know, I'm just so thrilled that we have this. And hopefully we can build something here pretty soon. I try to cover some of the stuff here. What I didn't cover, you can read. Let's see what else I did. Oh, the grew beets, the sugar company, bought a whole bunch of land along here, grew beets for a number of years, clear up to where McClellan Reservoir is, and then Englewood bought them out. Englewood owns that reservoir, the McClellan Reservoir, that's right there off of C-470.
I helped build that dam.
Good for you. Really? When was that? Do you remember?
1963.
Yeah. And see, John Martin, they started here in about the 50s because there was a guy that hauled wood in Roxborough and took it down there to the Helmers. And he said when they put the water line through for the Aurora water treatment plant, messed up the water over the spring park. It's just, you know, they even mined a little bit of uranium up the canyon here.
Water
I
tank?
talked to some uranium miners. And they've covered up that mine, but it used to be when you walked up there, you could see this old mine hole right next to the road, about a mile up. And you don't even see it now, they've covered it all up. That was uranium mining. So there's a lot of
history.
exciting history here. You're welcome to look at any of this. I went to the state park, and this will be I've got copies for the chapter. It's all Paula Erzman's oral stuff, a lot of her collections that she brought together to make some of these histories. And I guess I should try to copy the Tate stuff and put it in our files.
Definitely, yeah.
So we'll have some of that because it's this whole area here. So I don't know if you have any questions. It's just too much to cover in 20 minutes.
Way too much. But really, it gives us a good overview of just how many different
It's a
things have been
quick,
happening
yes,
in
it's an
this
overview.
area.
And you know, our goal is to maybe have our offices, as they said, down here. I wanted to have a straw bale. That's my dream. I don't know whether the Corps allowed that to happen because all the buildings are supposed to be flood proof. But I don't know how it could flood if it's above the spillway. But we could have volunteers. We could build it. It costs half as much. It's 50 times better insulation.
Anne's making a plug right now for anyone who
Yeah.
needs a straw bale. But Anne, thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thanks.
We really, really appreciate it.